It's time for the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
Hello and welcome in. It is the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com, breaking down Districts 1 and 2, week in, week out in the great state of Idaho. Brandon Baney joined by our North Idaho expert, Ryan Scaggs. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
Good morning. How about yourself?
I'm
doing well, I should say. How about yourself? But
I'm well, all things considered, for sure. We generally like to keep things pretty light here on the Prepcast, as evidenced by last week's show where we went off tangent. I don't even know 7 times.
We off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, but we have to start with a little bit of a downer today and some sad news. This is a story, of course, everybody in North Idaho has been following for the last year. But Craig Tefft, the icon of St. Mary's, longtime football coach, longtime baseball coach for the Lumberjacks, passed away due to colon cancer. We knew he had been battling that, of course. We have talked about it numerous times here on the Prepcast over the past year. I pray now that his struggles are over and he's in a better place.
Yeah, I know that he was actually at the game Friday night from what I, heard from talking to a few of the other coaches in the area. And, he rallied a little bit, and it was cool because he was surrounded by a group of friends. And then we were recording on Wednesday, the 20th. He passed yesterday afternoon, surrounded by friends and family. And, so our hearts go out to them. That's a huge loss. It's, we kind of experienced the similar situation up here in North Idaho. I think it was back in 2015 when we lost the Post Falls High School coach, Coach Hines. And, so, it's just it's a huge loss. Craig's a great guy and just he's a, consummate professional in coaching. And I think you look beyond like X's and O's on the football field, we get caught up in a lot of accolades and how much success he had as a coach at St. Mary's, but he was just a better person, I think, than he was a coach. And you talk to any of the kids that have gone through the program and all the people that knew him in the industry. I got to know him on the football field a little bit from my time coaching up here in North Idaho. And, he's just a great guy. And, it's a huge loss. It hurts. And I know that, he's got many friends that are coaches around the area and growing up here in North Idaho. And, he's pretty tight with the basketball staff down at Kendrick and, growing up with the Silflos and that's just it's a massive loss. And to know that he was with family and friends, but their struggles now complete. And he's, he fought to the last minute and he doesn't have to fight anymore. That's, it's sad, but, our prayers are with his family and with the community in St. Mary's and all of his friends.
Yeah, it was right around a year that he got the diagnosis and had been battling it. He coached St. Mary's last year in football and got him to the playoffs. And they got to go to Aberdeen for a first round playoff game. That was the last time I talked to him in text where he, responded. We had a back and forth talking about that game. And then the news came out shortly after that. Hey, he's battling cancer. We thought, okay, maybe he can still coach baseball, stepped away from that. Fundraisers were happening. Everybody had their, Tefft strong shirts. And that was, I think, one of the really inspirational stories last year. You talked about the ties that Craig had to Kendrick. That's where he grew up. When Kendrick played St. Mary's last year in boys basketball, the Kendrick team all bought those Tefft strong shirts. And it was all a fundraiser to help pay for his expenses and treatment and whatnot. And the entire team bought those shirts, didn't tell St. Mary's, and just came out to warm up with those shirts on. And that was a really impactful moment for each of those communities.
Yeah, there was a lot of tears in the crowd at that game. So, but, you can't speak high enough about, individuals like that. And when you lose one that's, you say one of the good ones, it stings a little bit. We kind of knew that things weren't the greatest in the last month or so for him. And, he's been fighting hard and, it sucks. It does suck. And, it hurts a little bit. And, I look at that program. You know, I mean, they look at the kids that were, you know, under his leadership for so long that are still in the program, and that's just it's a tough experience to go through for a community, and especially such a tight community like St. Mary's. I mean, you don't get a lot of places like that in the United States. Even I wouldn't say just Idaho, but around the U.S. Communities that are that close and that tight. So I know that this one today hurts a little bit for them.
Yeah, for me personally, I've shared this several times, but that's where my father-in-law grew up in St. Mary's, graduated from there in 77. So I've kind of got a soft spot in my heart for St. Mary's. In fact, they have a house in St. Mary's, actually Flat Creek, which is south of town. My in-laws have a house there for retirement, but they haven't retired yet, so it sits empty most of the time. So my wife and I will go down there on the weekends, and we joke that it's our summer home, our weekend home. We're helping, you know, put blinds up and get the house ready and stuff. But anyways,
yeah,
it is a cool community down there. They're grieving, obviously, and man, Craig was only 47 years old. I feel like that's like way too early, and this is like, it's becoming a trend in North Idaho. I feel like the past couple of years with Andrew Beck, who pioneered girls wrestling for both Highland and Grangeville. And then last year, Lance Abendroth, the athletic director at Moscow, he went way too early. And now Craig, it's just like, this is a trend that I don't like to see, but we're losing these high quality people way too soon.
Yeah. And it's, you know, we're supposed to die when we're fat and old. And, you know, it's not supposed to be young like this. And that's, I think, part that hurts. But, you know, the bright spots too, is that, you know, you talk about leaving a legacy. I think he did that very well in St. Mary's. And I think that, you know, the mantle's being carried, you know, by other coaches. I look at Coach Chase with the basketball program, who's a really close friend of Craig's, and he does a great job and coaches kind of in a similar fashion where he builds a relationship with his players, and the players respond out of the relationship, and the respect is there because of that. And yeah, it's just it's a rough thing to go through. And so, you know, we don't want to keep hammering how much it sucks to lose somebody, but there's some really fond memories too that I know a lot of people have of Craig and the type of character that he was. So yeah, we're hurting a little bit today, but I think there's going to be some times where, you know, in the future, you're going to be able to look back and smile, because a lot of cool stuff happened and all the fun moments with the guy.
Yeah, well, I think the first memory everybody has is that 2016 St. Mary's team that won state. Coach Tefft Craig was the guy leading the charge there, and that's their first and only championship in school history in 2016. What a special year that was.
Yeah, and I remember coaching against them in a jamboree with when he had that group, and it was. Yeah, I mean, that was a special crew that he had. I mean, we were a 4A team, and we were looking at them as a 2A, and we're like, yeah, we want nothing to do with that. You know, just who they had and the talent that was there and the way they play, and they reflected their coach in the way they played and practiced and prepared. So, I mean, yeah, it's just hats off to a great career in life. I mean, it sucks that it ends short. But, I mean, I think there's a lot to look back at, that there's a legacy left behind that's very memorable.
Yeah, and now Coach Tefft will be calling plays from up above. And meanwhile, no really good way to transition out of this news. But, I mean, St. Mary's as a football team, I think, is starting to pick up some steam here. They played a very tough non-conference schedule. They got into league play last week, Ryan, and beat Kellogg 30-18. It's not only their first win of the year, but their first win in league play. They're 1-0 in the Central Idaho League, the CIL, which is really all that counts.
Yeah, and you look at, you know, to segue into football, and with that, you know, every week matters in that conference this year. So every league win you can get is monumental with a two-bid league. You know, I look at Grangeville and St. Mary's, it's going to come down to that game as far as for the conference title. And St. Mary's, what they were able to do on the ground last week was just unbelievable. I think it was like the running back had 41 carries for 297 yards or something like that. So
yeah, so here are the stats. Here are the stats. As a team, St. Mary's rushes for 416 yards as a team. Trey Gibson, who we have known for a long time,
his legs fell off. I mean, or how did they not fall off? Go ahead.
One of the best players in the conference, certainly on the team. 47 carries for Trey Gibson. I mean, I've never seen that in my short time in Idaho where a guy just kept getting fed like that. He rushed for 391 yards and 4 touchdowns.
I'm sorry I shorted you 100 yards and you had, I gave you 297. It was 391. My apologies, Trey, but yeah, that's a heck of an effort. Holy cow.
And he scored all 4 touchdowns as well for St. Mary's. So that, I mean, tremendous win for the Lumberjacks. And you're right. It's setting up for this showdown between Grangeville and St. Mary's. And we'll talk about Grangeville here in just a second. They were in a wild game last week as well. And they will meet on Friday, October 6th. And we think that's probably the game that decides it. Kellogg has fallen off a little bit. Could still maybe compete for an at-large bid, or could, possibly create a 3-way tie if, Kellogg can take care of Grangeville. But they've already fallen behind the 8 ball a little bit here to St. Mary's. Kellogg will play Grangeville the week after, October 13th. So Grangeville gets St. Mary's and Kellogg in back-to-back weeks, and that will probably ultimately figure what trajectory they're on in terms of a league championship. Grangeville last week lost to New Plymouth 52-49, which is just a
shootout, man. Like, that was an impressive offensive explosion from both teams.
Yeah, and that's the deal with Grangeville is they're playing like very tight on the margins here. They're averaging almost 35 points per game, but they're allowing 32. And so it's been a high wire act. They are 1-3, but they have also, like St. Mary's, played a pretty challenging schedule this year. So yeah, I do think though it's going to come down to Grangeville and St. Mary's, and Kellogg maybe with a hot streak can get a 3rd spot to the playoffs. There are some at-large bids available, but to me, it's a clear top 2.
Yeah, for sure. Look at the top 2 coming out of this conference, and then, Grangeville's not an easy out. Let's put it that way. And I don't think St. Mary's is either, with running games late in the year and sloppy field conditions. You don't want to count out either of those teams. I think what's going to come down to is which of those 2 programs put it together with a more complete defensive effort week to week. And I think right now the edge tends to lean to St. Mary's a little bit, but I mean, Grangeville, it's like 6s. I mean, I really look at that. You could do a dice roll and figure out who wins the conference this year if you don't want to play that game. But it's going to be a tight one in the CIL for sure.
Yeah, good luck to Coach Greg Rouse and St. Mary's, as well as Grangeville and their longtime coach, Jeff Adams. Will continue to keep an eye on each of those 2 teams as we go. Timberlake played Moscow in a pretty fun game. This was a game we had on IdahoSports.com last week, a little 3A versus 4A matchup. Timberlake goes on the road and picks up a 10-point win, 38-28. Timberlake kind of stubbed their toe against McCall Donnelly a couple weeks ago, but I still think this is a really good team with the trio of backs that they've got. Caius Tebby, 113 yards, 2 touchdowns. Vaughn Higgins, 111 yards in a score. You can't get more even. 113 for Tebby, 111 for Higgins. And then Cooper Lenz, he didn't have as much rushing totals as he has in previous games, but he returned a kickoff 80 yards for a touchdown and won IdahoSports.com player of the game honors.
Yeah, and then you look at what they're able to do in the passing game also. I mean, in the attempts that they get, the few and far between, but when they're successful, they usually strike big. So I look at that Timberlake team, running a wing T attack, but being balanced out of it. It's going to bode well later in the year, obviously, but they only get 1 conference game. And that's going to come at the end of the season against Bonners Ferry, who's a team that seems to be reeling a little bit right now. So you look at the playoff picture, what can happen. I think the big test, for Timberlake out in front of them is going to be this month against Sugar Salem next weekend. Not this coming week, but the weekend following. But
and this week they host St. Mary's. So I mean, it's not. Boy, that game.
That game will have 120 rushes. Like, I mean,
that game could kick off at 7:00 and be done by 7:45.
Yeah, you could have halftime by 7:30. I mean, we've seen it before in games like that, to where we have a halftime. I think it's 7:35, and then the game ends like somewhere after 8:30, and you're like, "What in the world?" But yeah, with the rushing attacks in both those teams, that could be a short game. You might be able to land and get to the restaurant before they close at the end of that one.
Yeah, he might be able to hit close in time for sure. So interesting 2-game stretch coming up for Timberlake. I do think they'll win that auto bid. Now, last year, both they and Bonners Ferry got into the playoffs. I don't think that's the case this year. Bonners Ferry, I think at this point, with the way they've been struggling, their focus is on, okay, season finale. We can get an auto bid if we knock out Timberlake, and we
1-8 headed to state.
we got to put all our effort into that. And then I think from there, Timberlake would get an at-large bid, but a little too early still to be talking playoff stuff. We wait until October to start doing that type of thing, but it's going to be interesting for Timberlake. And then of course, in 2 weeks, hosting Sugar Salem on IdahoSports.com. You're going to be there, Scaggs.
Yeah, I'll be on the call for that one. I'm looking forward to doing that game too. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm doing it with our friend down south, Lance Taylor. So that should be a fun game.
Yeah, and he's a guy that lives in Sugar, and so it's your job to balance him out. Make sure we got a good, even, equitable. No, Lance does a good job of.
He does a great job. Yeah,
for sure.
It'll be a fun broadcast, but. Yeah, yes. That's one that you circle on the schedule at the beginning of the year, and you kind of like look at it, and it's going to be a pretty big affair as far as the 3A realm goes. The 4As didn't do too well against the 3A schools this weekend. If you look at it up here in North Idaho.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next segue. Is head scratching for sure. Where I don't know what to make of this league. Moscow, I think, is better. Lakeland is really banged up.
Yeah,
they're down to their third string quarterback, and they're missing Lovey Wheel, their standout running back. So they are just running on fumes at this point. And Sandpoint has also been kind of dinged up a little bit, but they seem to kind of be tweaking and figuring some things out. They got into a shootout on Saturday against Homedale in a neutral site game in Hermiston, Oregon. And so they lost 44-35. Basically, Homedale jumped out to a 14-0 lead. And from there, the two sides kind of traded scores, but because Sandpoint had kind of dug that early hole, they were never quite able to fight their way out of it. But Max Frank balled out, 70 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns, caught 3 passes and a touchdown from Drew Lehman as well. And Cody Brewster rushed for 115 yards and a score. This is definitely a run-oriented attack for Sandpoint. And if Lehman can continue to kind of pick his spots and attack, I think at this point, unless Lakeland heals up, I lean Sandpoint. But
yep. And I mean, I look at Moscow could be the team that sneaks in and, knocks off Lakeland too, or I mean, vice versa. It's going to be really weird. It's one of those years. I think we saw it like 5 years ago in the conference where everybody was just neck and neck. Everybody entered the last week 1-1 with each other. And so went to the last round of games on whoever wins basically gets to do the draw straws for the league championship. But yeah, I mean, I look at this affair and, Moscow on the upswing. Offensively, they're getting a better offensive output. I think defensively, they're going to have to tighten the reins up a little bit and figure something out on the defensive side of the ball. They can shut some teams down defensively. They're going to be in the mix because I think offensively, Isaacson and the other guys that are out there on the field, they're doing a great job. I mean, I think they've really stepped up into their roles, especially for being a young crew. Sandpoint, obviously, figuring it out because they got a different quarterback than who they started the year with. But they're getting, different players and athletes in position to make plays. And I think that's where they're, making it. So what you're going to see is it's going to come down to who's healthy and who's got a defense at the end of the year. I mean, and if you're going that route, Sandpoint appears to be the healthiest. I would give them the edge just based on what they've got pieces, on the table still. If Lakeland can get some of those guys back, I mean, they're back in the mix, obviously, but it's going to be, they got boat raced by Coeur d'Alene last week, which wasn't a really fair draw for them with your third string quarterback and second and third string running backs and, a couple other pieces missing on the defensive and offensive side of the ball. And they drew a tough draw again this week getting Post Falls. So, that's if Lakeland can get healthy though, they can make an interesting race there. You just ditched your entire mic setup, I believe. So
wow, I'm going to apologize to the listeners. That's going to sound awful when you're listening back to this. That was probably pretty loud, huh?
It wasn't bad. It wasn't that bad, but I just saw your mic just like ditch straight out of the stand.
It fell off the arm. Yeah. Anyways, I'll just
You look
hold
like you're doing a sideline interview. So
I'll hold it like this, like those guys on the pregame shows do, right? Where they're broadcasting from the arena and they're all holding the mic. I'll the next time you launch into a diatribe, I'll mute myself and reattach the mic. But basically, it's something new every week, folks. That's why you got to tune in. Yes, that is a game we're broadcasting Friday night on IdahoSports.com. You and I personally, Scaggs. This is our first broadcast together since the Idaho All-State, the Idaho State, the statewide All-Star basketball games from North Idaho College. So I'm looking forward to that. Post Falls hosting Lakeland. This is going to be, I think, an easy time for the Trojans, but should be a fun game regardless.
Well, we talked about Post Falls being able to get back to full strength, and I think they hit the right spot in their schedule with University last week. They got to rest some of their guys, and then they get Lakeland this week, which usually ends up being a pretty, sporty affair. If you talk about what's going on as far as the chippiness of that game can get chippy pretty quick. Last year we saw Lakeland steal a win. I mean, that was the other thing too. Like, that was a big win for the Hawks last year. So there was a bit of a revenge recipe for this game for Post Falls. I think it's going to be all Trojans early and often in that one. But I mean, since we're calling the game, I don't want to sound like a homer or anything like that, but it's just, man, I mean, I look at Lakeland fondly as, a team that I've used to coach, but you want to see them get healthy, and this isn't the right game to have to try to get back to full strength.
No, and Sandpoint's playing Lewiston this week. That's going to be a tough matchup for sure. And Moscow is playing Lake City, so it's all 4A, 5A. We could easily see these 4A teams all go 0-3 again. But it shouldn't. This is why context is important, because the schedules are so imbalanced for these 4A teams that's why you'll want to see Lakeland with your own eyes on IdahoSports.com. If you just score watch, you're not getting the full picture of what this team is capable of. So that would be my plug there to watch. And honestly, it's going to come down to 3 weeks in October. October 6th, Lakeland at Sandpoint. October 13th, Sandpoint at Moscow. And then October 20th, Moscow at Lakeland. I mean, that's gonna determine it. Probably 2 teams get to the playoffs this year from the North. I'm just guessing, but we'll see.
We'll see what their rankings come out at.
Right. They get 1 auto bid, and then there are 8 at-large bids available. We've seen years where all 3 have gotten in. I'm just not sure.
I say of all the 4A, 5A games, the most intriguing one to me is Moscow and Lake City. I look at that game. There's a possibility Moscow could pull the stunner in that one. Lake City's trying to figure some things out. They drew a tough draw last week with Bishop Kelly. Lake City goes 3 consecutive weeks or 4 consecutive weeks with all 4A opponents. So they're playing down a little bit. I know they're trying to figure it out. They've got the talent there, but let's see if they can put together the pieces. Moscow's looking to play spoiler. That's the game I would put a pin on as far as the question mark of all the games going on this week in North Idaho.
Yes, and then speaking of the 5As, hard to glean anything. Post Falls had a 69-0 win over University, which we talked about. Tevin Burns, 160 yards, 4 touchdowns in the win. Lewiston played a similarly overmatched opponent, the Buckaroos from Pendleton, Oregon. Lewiston is significantly larger than Pendleton. They win 39-12. Noah Carpenter returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown for Lewiston, and the route was on from there. Coeur d'Alene shuts out Lakeland 54-0. Quietly, Caden Simmons has kind of taken over this offense. Sophomore quarterback for Coeur d'Alene, and
he's done well.
4 touchdowns to 4 different receivers: Colby Coe, Kai Wheeler, Carson Harris, and Brett Myers last week. And so, big picture here. And I hate talking playoffs this early, but the fans are. So it's our duty to kind of give the fans what they want here. When you look this year at the 5A bracket, Scaggs, North Idaho gets 2 teams automatically. And then in years past, there's been 2 at-large bids where a 3rd team could compete for that 3rd spot. But this year, there's only 1 at-large bid. Somehow the state of Ada got 7 auto bids instead of the 6 that they've had in the past. So they got 7 auto bids this year, which means 1 at-large bid. And I'll be honest, I don't think a third team from North Idaho is going to make it. Coeur d'Alene has lost to Rocky Mountain already, which is a good loss. Really, Lewiston, if they finish third, they're going to look back on that loss to Capital and go, boy, that's a game we needed to win and didn't. And so I think it's 2 from North Idaho. So between Coeur d'Alene, Lewiston, Post Falls, buckle up.
Yeah, and those are going to be fun games to keep eyes on too. I think you look down later in the year, do we have a bit of a quarterback controversy in Coeur d'Alene? We'll see what happens. I mean, we always talk about things that are going on within the programs, and I don't want to throw fuel on a fire that's not there necessarily, but I look at some of these teams with players mixed around. There's could be a bit of a claim to, and then you look at Simmons played great. Then they had the other kid that came in after him played awesome too. I mean, they had 2 quarterbacks realistically in that Lakeland game that looked phenomenal. So I think the cupboards are pretty full for the Vikings for years to come. After this year too.
Yeah, and so Jamison Kazar started the year as the quarterback, and I guess this is when I live in North Idaho, but I have to monitor what's going on around the whole state. So I haven't had a chance to actually ask yet what happened there, and I obviously haven't seen Coeur d'Alene with my eyes since the first game of the year when they played Rigby, and I was broadcasting that game. So I don't know if Kazar is injured. I don't know what's going on there. And honestly, I don't know if anybody does except the Coeur d'Alene fans. And that's just the hard part of not being able to go cover this team or being able to watch this team is I'm not sure what's going on there. So yeah, I'll admit I have no idea.
We'll try to dig to the bottom of it. I don't know. Maybe not. Well, I think the talk and what's going to show up on the field is going to speak for itself. And I think Coeur d'Alene, you look at the offensive output the last few weeks, there's been a noted difference. And Carson Spielman's been more effective as the offense has gotten better in the passing game. Carson Spielman's been more effective in the rushing game. That's a big difference for that Vikings team. You know what the defense is going to be week in and week out. That defense is stout, solid. I mean, they're, in my mind, a top 5, top 6 defense in the state. So offensively, if they can get a lift there, you put a circle on that Post Falls Coeur d'Alene game again. That's going to be at Coeur d'Alene this year. That's going to be a big game to watch and a fun one for sure.
Yeah. All right. 8-man football. Last week, we had a number of teams featured on IdahoSports.com. Cammy goes down south and gets a big win over Council. The game I was at, Scaggs, actually was pretty fun. It was the second football game ever held at the Mariman Health Coeur Center in Worley. That is a beautiful facility. And I
told you it's awesome.
Lakeside was playing Clark Fork. Myself and Brian Hall were there broadcasting, and I get there and I was well accommodated. The folks at Mariman Health took care of us and treated us well. The folks at Lakeside High took care of us and treated us well. After the game, I get back to my home in Hayden, and I reach in my pocket and I'm like, I don't have my cell phone. I'm like, that's not good. So I'm getting ready to turn around and drive all the way back down to Worley and the Mariman Health Center. And my wife goes, well, let's see if we can track your phone first and see where it's at. And I was like, oh, that's why I married you, because you're so smart. So anyways, I tracked the location and it pings to Lakeside High School. And I'm like, okay, obviously somebody picked it up and brought it back to the school, right? Awesome. Shout out to Adrian Brown Sonder, the athletic director at Lakeside. You saw my phone sitting there. Was like, I bet somebody left this. Took it to the office. I ran down there Monday morning to pick it back up. So big thanks to Adrian. I got there. We got there pretty early on Friday night, and I was looking for Adrian. I'd never met him before. And so I asked Coach Buell, the Lakeside coach, I said, hey, where's Adrian at? I just had a couple of quick questions. Oh, he's over there manning the grill.
Yo, Adrian. Yeah.
So, an AD wears several hats, but grill master got to be near the top of the list. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Only in 8-man football in Idaho, you find that. That's amazing. That facility is gorgeous. I hope, that facility gets used in the postseason too. That's a gem to have up here in North Idaho. I know that community is they're head over heels for that facility.
Yeah, it was kind of cool going back with Brian because Brian actually taught and coached at Lakeside early on in his career. He's been a lot of places,
Oh
but
yeah.
Lakeside was one of the stops. And so he actually, Liam Hendricks's dad, Liam Hendricks is the quarterback for Lakeside this year. Liam Hendricks's dad was a student of Brian's when he was a teacher. So we were talking to him quite a bit, getting some good background info. And essentially with Lakeside, they of course have their own field in Plummer, right? It's grass, and then this new turf field gets built. And they had a home game to start the year against Logos. It was in Plummer, and that went fine. But then they've had a problem with the lights ever since. And so they were like, well, we're going to have to like move all our games to 3:00 kickoffs. And somebody was like, hey, why don't we just go play at the Mariman Health Center, and play under the lights on the turf? And it sounds like they're going to play the rest of their games there. Home
That's
games,
awesome.
anyways.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
So the first football game was against Wallace, and then the second game ever was against Clark Fork last week. We had it on IdahoSports.com. As for the game itself, 37-16 was the final. This was a game that was at halftime 14-8, and you want to talk about first half that flies by. Clark Fork ran the clock down to like 1 or 2 seconds every time they had the ball on offense. They took every last second they could, and it worked out for them for a half. And then they just made a couple of mistakes on offense, back-to-back defensive touchdowns for Lakeside in the third quarter, really swung the game the Knights' direction, where you had a scoop and score by Lucky Matt, and then you had a pick six from Jamari Pion. He played well. Quincy Hall ran the ball well. Lucky Matt was our IdahoSports.com player of the game. He was the homecoming king at halftime. Then he gets the scoop and score in the third quarter of action, which is always great to see. I came away thinking, this Lakeside team is physical. I came in expecting a track meet with all these athletes. They're physical. They line it up and they pound the ball up the middle. And
that's how they play basketball too, though. Like you look at it, they play basketball physical also. But yeah, go ahead.
And on defense, their linebackers and defensive line are stout. I cannot wait for them to play Mullen St. Regis. I think, to me, the two best teams are by far Mullen St. Regis and Lakeside. They will play Friday, September 29th in Worley, and then the rematch comes Friday, October 13th in Mullen. That's going to be two really outstanding matchups, I think. It'll be fun.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would agree with you there.
Yeah. 8-man football this week on IdahoSports.com, North Idaho game night. Garrison Hardy will be on the call as Logos hosts Lapway. We're going Lapway? Yeah. We came into the season thinking Lapway was probably, they had just lost a lot of talent to graduation. Wasn't sure what they had coming up through the pipeline. They take it to Clearwater Valley last week, and talking to their coach, Alan Hutchins, this week, he said, hey, we're on the wrong end of some season-ending injuries. 3 or 4 impact players not playing for Clearwater Valley, and so they're struggling. But here's a chance now. Logos still undefeated in the White Pine, 3-0. They're 4-0 overall. But here comes Lapway, and we know Lapway can get into shootouts sometimes. This is going to be a fun game Friday night on IdahoSports.com.
Yeah, and you look at Logos, I mean, they're sitting in the driver's seat right now, too, which is, impressive for that group. And, Lapway, you look at the teams that are left, in the playoff race, I look at it kind of as a 4-horse realistic picture, maybe 5 if you want to throw Prairie still in the mix a little bit. But between Potlatch, Logos, Lapway, Kamiah, like those teams right there, they're kind of dogpiled at the top. And, every week's going to matter now from now to the end of the season. But Lapway offensively with Year Out, and, they've got other guys that are able. Year Out was all over the field on Friday night in that game against Clearwater Valley. I think he had like 14 tackles, including a turnover and a touchdown. And then he had some rushing. And, yeah, it was just – he had a phenomenal game. But Lapway's been able to, like you said, get in some shootouts now, and offensively starting to make that scoreboard twitch a little bit. So that's a team that could be on the deadly end of an upward swing. So for opponents, so that's a team you don't want to take lightly with the athletes they've got in that program. They're able to get things moving. I mean, you don't want to say it's a trap game for Logos, but you got to be on your toes every week now. And Logos offensively, what they're able to do, and defensively, what they're able to do, they're just going to keep, sticking to who they are. But it's going to be an interesting, I think next 3 weeks are going to be pretty telling there in the White Pine 1A. That's going to be D1. That 1A D1 is going to be a fun race to watch towards the end of the season.
Yeah, so this week, Logos hosts Slapway. Potlatch will take on Troy. And if they both get through that unscathed, next Friday in Potlatch, 2 unbeaten teams colliding for bragging rights in the White Pine League. Should be.
Yeah, the battle for Latah County.
That's right. Potlatch hoping they could fire up that chainsaw, cut off a couple more cookies after they do that after every touchdown. It's kind of a cool deal. So a lot of exciting 8-man action on tap this week as well. And we had some excellent soccer happen just last night, Ryan. We're recording this on Wednesday the 20th. We had some Tuesday night crosstown action between Lake City and Coeur d'Alene. We'll wrap up with a little real football talk, right? Football talk. Lake City boys very quietly having a banner year. Nobody's talking about them. They're not getting any respect. Typical story from the north. Yeah, that's how they want it, right?
They want it that way. Absolutely.
But both Lake City's boys and girls win 1-0 over Coeur d'Alene last night. The boys are still undefeated. I think they've wrapped up the number 1 seed for the district tournament. And the Lake City girls, lost some pieces to graduation, but they're not as dominant as they were last year, but still very good.
Yeah, I believe they lost 3 Division I soccer players. So, I mean, you talk about replacing that there's a lot to go for. But, I mean, the league championship is up for grabs. I mean, it's literally, there's 3 teams clamoring for first place right now that are in realistic striking distance of that. So, the number 1 seed is going to come down probably to the last week of the season, realistically. Coeur d'Alene, Lake City, and Lewiston are all kind of trying to make claim for that. But the 5A IEL, it's like, who wants to win it? It's there for the picking. I think, you look at what the conference is bringing down and Lake City being young, if they're going to peak at the right time, now is it. I mean, if they're going to start picking off wins against crosstown rival Coeur d'Alene, you got some big matches coming up the next week or two as well. So, things are going to get interesting and heated. The 4A is much the same. You look at Sandpoint and Moscow are, kind of in the heated race there as well. So it's going to be interesting on the pitch for the next couple of weeks.
Definitely. Grayson Cordes scores the game winner for Lake City in the first half on the boys' side. On the girls' side, it's Gabby Henkel who scores early on in the second half for the 1-0 win. But in both games, and Coeur d'Alene Press did a good job having the full stats, not just the scores. Shots on goal on the girls' side, Lake City outshoots Coeur d'Alene 17-7. And on the boys' side, Lake City outshoots Coeur d'Alene on goal 11-4. And so typically the more bites at the apple, the more shots at goal you're getting. Eventually, law of averages says one or two are going to sneak in there. Not always the case, but it worked out for Lake City last night. And so, yes, North Idaho soccer gearing up here. We're hitting the stretch drive. Season is more than halfway over, if you can believe it. So keep an eye on things. Yeah.
No, it's going to be a fun thing to watch, I think, as the playoff races are heating up in all sports, including volleyball. So everything is kind of getting that stretch run towards the end of the year. Football, you look at it, you're already 6 weeks in after this week. So it's just crazy how fast things have moved already this fall, because it feels like we just got started.
I don't like it. Slow down.
I saw Schweitzer got snow last night too. So I'm like looking at this and I'm like, okay, like we are hitting fall. So yeah, it's things are going to get fun here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I switched internet companies. Obviously,
I noticed we haven't had any glitches this week.
much better service now. And as we were calling my old internet provider to cancel on Monday night, the account's in my wife's name, so she had to call. They're asking us 10 different times. Oh, what can we do to get you to stay? And oh, how's the weather up where you're at? And my wife just totally deadpans, like, oh, great, it's gonna snow soon, so I'm really excited. Wrap it up. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Just
much like with what we're trying to do right now with the Prepcast. No.
Yes. So, anyways, internet check. Prepcast check. 2 games this Friday night on IdahoSports.com. It is Lapway at Logos, 7:00. Also, Lakeland at Post Falls at 7:00 as well. Totally live, totally free on IdahoSports.com. All right. Until then, Enjoy the competition this weekend, everybody. For Ryan Scaggs, I'm Brandon Baney, and we'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.